The last portion of 10.6 is really just to help you make decisions. When you're confronted with a quadratic equation, how do you decide what method to use? We've learned factoring, graphing, which everyone loves, well, only on a calculator actually, square roots, completing the square, and last, the quadratic formula, which we just learned. And factoring we did in chapter 9, 9.4 to 9.8. Graphing we did at the very beginning of this chapter in 10.3. Square roots we did in 10.4. Completing the square in 10.5, and the quadratic equation we've just been doing in 10.6. So when do you factor? Well, you know the answer, because if you just apply some logic, you know when the numbers work out easily, right? When you can see that they factor easily, use that. Some has to do with how good you are with your multiplication tables, because some people can see it more clearly, but factoring is wonderful if you can see that. Graphing is when approximate solutions are acceptable. In other words, you just want to get a bird's eye view, okay? Square roots. Well, if you remember, square roots can only happen when you have x squared minus a value equals 0, right? Where you're going to end up with x squared equals 4, for example. If you can't have the bx term, right? So it's only in a situation where you have a situation like this, x squared equals a number which they call d, okay? Completing the square. Well, completing the square is where ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and usually a equals 1, and b is an even number. Because if you remember, we divide b by 2, so it's a whole lot easier. If a is 1, there's no a, in other words, or it just looks like x squared, and b is even because you're dividing it by 2, so it's clean. The quadratic formula you can use for any quadratic equation. Now, what's the caveat? In other words, caveat is Latin for watch out. What's the watch out with the quadratic formula? Well, as you could see, it's easy to make a mistake. You have to be very careful with it. So if I can factor, I'm going to factor. If I can see that I've got a square root, I'm going to do a square root. If I think I can complete the square pretty easily, I'm going to do that. But if not, the quadratic equation is really reliable. All right, let's look at some situations where you just have to give me a decision, and there'll be some of those in your homework. Just to practice, and this is what example 4 is practicing with you. And I've written it above the line. Let me rewrite it, example 4. What method would you use? The first one has 10x squared minus 7 equals 0. Well, the first thing I notice is that I can do this, and then I can divide both sides by 10. And so this looks like I would absolutely use square roots. I'm almost there, and it just took 2 steps. You don't have to solve these, by the way. Just say what's the best way to do it. x squared plus 4x equals 0. Well, the first thing I notice here is that I can factor my monomial out, right? I can factor out an x and be left with x plus 4. Once I do that, it's an easy x equals 0, x equals -4. I'm done. So factoring, for sure. Why would I do something longer when I can just factor? Let's look at C. 5x squared plus 9x minus 4 equals 0. Okay, well, clearly I can't use square roots. Factoring, 5x, x, let's see. 2 times 10 minus 2, that's not going to give me an 8. 4 times 5 is 20. Yeah, no, factoring's not going to work. Square roots isn't going to work. Graphing, I want a real answer. Completing the square, yikes, I have a 5 here. This is not an even number. Clearly, this is where I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So I'm going to ask you right now to do 5, 6, and 7. Guided practice 5, 6, and 7. Pause the video and then come back and we'll talk through those options. But don't just follow me in this. Do them and then come back. Okay, well then now let's look at guided practice 5, 6, and 7. I'm assuming that you've now done these. X squared plus x minus 6 equals 0. X squared minus 9 equals 0. X squared plus 6x equals 5. Well, my first go-to is going to be factoring, just to see, because if it's easy, again, it's just a couple of steps. So I'm going to give it a shot. X, 6, the factors of 6 are plus 3 minus 2, plus 2 minus 3. And I can see that plus 3 minus 2 could probably work. Plus 3 minus 2, yep. So factoring was a good call. The numbers are not big. I didn't have a lot of difficulty or confusion. Factoring was definitely the right call. Well, this one I have x squared minus 9. And I can see right away, I can set this equal to 9, so I can for sure use square root. But I'm going to rewrite it below because I bet you some of you saw something else. If you saw a difference of 2 squares, you were absolutely right. X minus 3, x plus 3 equals 0. So you could also use factoring. Either of these methods would work out beautifully. Last, I'm going to look over here and put it in proper quadratic equation form. X squared plus 6x minus 5 equals 0. I'm going to try to factor like I did over here because it doesn't all look that complicated. Let's see what happens. Well, my only options here are -5, +1, or positive, let's see, -1, +5, and I can see right away that's not going to work. So factoring won't work. Square roots won't work. I don't want a graph because I want a real number as an answer. Completing the square could work, actually, because I have a 1 here, and this divides easily. I can see right away that this is going to give me uh, 6 divided by 2 squared plus 9, and I can see right away x plus 3 squared equals 14, and I'm almost done. So yes, I would choose completing the square, but you could also use the quadratic formula. Some people, for some reason, don't love completing the square, and you can always use the quadratic formula. Okay, that is the end of 10.6, and The only other thing I'm going to add will be optional. At the end of this, I'm going to offer you a derivation of the quadratic formula, number 1. And number 2, I'm going to add some Khan Academy videos. I suggest you look at them if you're confused. I'm giving you as many tools as I know how to solve these. It's not hard, it just takes a lot of accuracy. Be careful, don't skip steps.